I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Your entrance was good, his was better.
Whether it's the new MTV generation design of the Batmobile, a very sexually aggressive Nicole Kidman, or watching the utter disdain that Tommy Lee Jones clearly has for Jim Carrey, there's plenty of unexpected entertainment to be had in this wacky comic book movie. So join us on our journey through all the neon and bat nipples with Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever. After the reaction to Batman Returns, which labeled the film as overly dark, a big change was on the horizon. While Tim Burton met with execs to discuss a third film, they seemed less than enthusiastic. He got the impression that they didn't want him to direct the film, repeatedly insisting that he focus on a smaller project instead. So he left. Directionless, the studio had to get to work. Joel Schumacher was chosen after his work on The Client impressed both the studio as well as Burton, who gave his approval on the new director. Burton even remained on the movie as a producer. Schumacher was preparing his film, with Keaton still intended to star, but Keaton was struggling with the idea of returning to the role. While he was interested when Joel was still toying with the idea of adapting Batman Year One, that interest disappeared when the studio mandated a full-on sequel. Not wanting to repeat himself, Keaton left the project. So the task of finding the correct Batman was yet again underway. Thanks for watching DC Films Revisited. If you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video comes up. Now, back to the show. Ethan Hawke and Billy Baldwin were both considered, as they were on the rise at the time. As was Val Kilmer, who lit the world on fire with his performance as Doc Holliday in Tombstone.
I'm your Huckleberry.
Studios took notice. When Kilmer was offered the role, he was actually researching for a different movie in a cave in Africa, surrounded by bats. Taking this as a sign, he accepted the part without reading a script.
Insightful. Naive, but insightful.
His Batman has been the subject of both praise and criticism, and he's been very vocal about his dislike for being in the Batsuit, which essentially made him deaf. But it's hard to deny how much they nailed the look. Lee and Janet Scott Batchelor were brought aboard to write the script, and they crafted the story that played with the idea of Bruce's duality. The villains were to be the Riddler and Scarecrow, and finally introduced the Dick Grayson character, who would eventually become Robin. The Riddler was originally much more psychotic, even having a pet rat that he spoke to. This was lightened up, worrying that they wouldn't appeal to younger audiences. Schumacher also felt that the Scarecrow character was too dark. Bringing on his screenwriter from The Client, Akiva Goldsman, they replaced Scarecrow with Two-Face and kept the theme of identity. The villains are on a journey to destroy Batman and take over Gotham through mind control. It's about as comic booky as you can get, which is precisely what Joel was going for. As you may remember, when Billy D. Williams was cast as Harvey Dent in Batman, he was contracted to be Two-Face in any future film. But Schumacher wanted to go in a different direction, so Williams was bought out of his contract. The part was actually offered to Mel Gibson, but he was busy with Braveheart. Having worked with Tommy Lee Jones on The Client, Schumacher offered him the role, but he was hesitant to accept. He ended up relenting after his son insisted he take it. A decision he may live to regret.
If I was a superhero, where would I hide?
Given the Riddler's more comedic side, the studio approached Robin Williams about taking on the part. However, Williams was still angry that the studio had baited him with the Joker role in the first film, so he declined the offer. In a very weird turn of events, Michael Jackson aggressively campaigned for the role. Yes, that Michael Jackson. Thankfully, the studio wasn't interested and wanted someone that could pull off the humorous element. Brad Dourif, Adam Sandler, and even John Malkovich were considered. But there was one person taking the world by storm in the mid-90s, Jim Carrey. There had been rumors for years about Jones and Carrey not getting along on set. This was confirmed by Carrey himself in an interview with the late Norm Macdonald.
He went like to hug me and he said, "I hate you. I really don't like you."
Wow, that's pretty rough to say to someone you're working with. Given how much Riddler outshines Two-Face in the film, it's not a stretch to say that most of this stemmed from jealousy.
Has anybody ever told you you have a serious impulse control problem?
Even Schumacher threw shade at Jones in an interview. "I'm tired of defending overpaid, overprivileged actors. I pray I don't work with them again." So, clearly it wasn't the best experience on set. But Carrey really brought it, providing an overtly charismatic version of the character. He was so uniquely Jim Carrey that several instances where stunt performers would have been used, like the destruction of the Batcave, was actually Jim. Schumacher just didn't feel like any performer could properly reenact the pure tour de force known as Jim Carrey. And he was probably right.
You know, it's always risky introducing a tamed animal into the wild.
The role of Robin was originally set for Marlon Wayans in Batman Returns. Given that he was even paid for the role, his return seemed like a foregone conclusion. But with a different creative team came a different vision for Robin, so the search was on again. Leonardo DiCaprio met with Schumacher for the role, but didn't feel it was right for him and declined. Matt Damon, Mark Wahlberg, and Christian Bale were all considered, but the part eventually went to Chris O'Donnell. He had impressed the studio with Scent of a Woman, and they thought he had the right appeal for the female demographic. For the role of the love interest, Rene Russo was originally cast as Dr. Chase Meridian, but when Keaton dropped out, Warner felt Russo was too old to play Kilmer's love interest. An absurd idea considering she was just 5 years older and still looked like this. Sandra Bullock, Robin Wright, and Linda Hamilton were all considered for the part, until Nicole Kidman was cast. Schumacher had to fight for her though, as the studio didn't think she was sexy enough. This scene convinced them. Her Dr. Meridian character is essentially just really horned up for Batman, and her character arc seems to be, "Oh hey, I love Batman," or "Wait, I really love Bruce. Wait, they're the same person? Oh geez." Expanding upon the roles of the women in this franchise, Debbie Mazar and Drew Barrymore were cast as the sidekicks of Two-Face, Sugar and Spice. They're playful and mostly exist for the villains to vamp with. They were originally called Leather and Lace, but being as it's a kids movie, Warner asked for a change. Pat Hingle returns as Commissioner Jim Gordon, and Michael Gough returns as loyal butler Alfred Pennyworth. They each have a little more to do in this, but their role is still mostly exposition. The addition of Dick Grayson gives them slightly more purpose, since they essentially have a rebellious teenager to take care of. Alfred even roasts Bruce at one point.
"You really are quite bright, despite what people say."
Savage. This film marks the start of several cameos by US Senator Patrick Leahy in the Batman franchise. He was a massive Batman fan and even wrote the foreword to The Dark Knight Archives. Bob Kane was on set at least once a week with a chair set up right next to Schumacher's. This allowed him to be more hands-on than he ever was on the Burton films, though his specific contributions were quite minor. His wife, Elizabeth Sanders, even gets a part as Gossip Gertie. Oh yeah, and does this guy look familiar? That's right, long before he was directing Iron Man, Jon Favreau actually showed up in a Batman movie. Crazy. Remember all the brilliant work done on Gotham City by both Anton Furst and Bo Welch? Well, wipe that all from your mind and let me introduce you to this CGI monstrosity. Schumacher wanted to avoid the designs of the prior films, so he brought Barbara Ling on as the production designer. He wanted neon to represent the comics of the 40s and 50s, and he wanted huge faces to give the city personality. Talk about being very literal. But it's not all CGI monstrosities. There are some really impressive sets here. The Batcave is huge in scale and just beautifully lit. Two-Face's base features these really contrasting styles to show his different personalities. Then the Riddler base at the end feels like big-budget Adam West Batman. Famous makeup designer Rick Baker was brought on to do the Two-Face makeup effects. The bright pink helps make the design a little less grotesque. I mean, just imagine if this were the color of blood and flesh. Yikes. Bob Ringwood redesigned the Batsuit back to the armor that resembled human anatomy. Schumacher felt Batman should look like a Greek god. I guess that explains the nipples. Robin's suit had a very similar Greek god look, though we were given more of the classic design earlier on in the film. Strangely enough, the main look of the Batmobile was based on the works of H.R. Giger from the Alien franchise. Schumacher wanted it to look more organic than the Burton versions. While the Giger design was rejected, a less intense version was made by Alan Pike. The other designs are rather silly and seem to be more of a callback to the Adam West Batmobile. Despite Danny Elfman's score being iconic, Schumacher wanted to do away with it entirely. He hired ELLIOT Goldenthal to score the film, with the caveat that it be an entirely original composition. Goldenthal actually does a great job and provides some memorable themes. But it gets a little sketchy when you realize they used Elfman's score to advertise the film. Then there's the pop group En Vogue, who shows up as, street workers? Then, harkening back to the days of Prince and Batman, both U2 and Seal were used for the soundtrack, providing the hit singles Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me, and Kiss from a Rose. I shouldn't even need to tell you how much both of these songs rule. They established fairly early on that this is a much lighter movie than prior entries.
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
But for a kids movie, they sure do a lot of adult stuff. Dr. Meridian literally tries to use the bat symbol as a booty call. Riddler gets deformed in a really disturbing way. Then there are all the flashbacks to Bruce's childhood as he's walking between his parents' caskets. For a movie that wanted to be lighter, it was really sending mixed messages.
You see, I'm both Bruce Wayne and Batman. Not because I have to be, because I choose to be.
Batman Forever released to theaters on June 16, 1995, and brought in $52 million on its opening weekend. This was the highest opening weekend at the time, and ended its run at $336 million. The film was ridiculously successful outside of just box office gross. Toys, video games, and even the soundtrack was a big hit. There were actually 2 separate novelizations based on the film, one by Peter David and the other by Alan Grant. No, not that Alan Grant. David wrote the true version while Grant wrote the kids' adaptation. The movie had not been well received by critics, although it has gained in esteem more recently. Despite this mixed status, the film actually received multiple Academy Award nominations, including Best Cinematography and Best Sound Effects Editing. The original runtime was 2 hours and 40 minutes, and featured a much darker tone than what was released to theaters. The film opened on Two-Face's escape from Arkham Asylum, and even featured a giant bat during a dream sequence. Some of these deleted scenes exist on the DVD, and they help us glimpse into a slightly different film. In recent years, with so many fan movements demanding original creator cuts of films, there has been a push for the original Schumacher cut to be released. This gained momentum after Schumacher's death in 2020, when Warner confirmed the existence of an alternate cut. This version featured a more serious tone, less Dick Grayson, and more of a focus on the psychological issues of Bruce Wayne. Whether or not this ever sees the light of day is anyone's guess, but after the Snyder Cut, anything is possible. Tommy Lee Jones's dislike for the work kept him firmly out of comic book movies, until Marvel was able to coax him over for Captain America: The First Avenger. Jim Carrey may have never returned to the DC universe, but he is currently the villain, Dr. Robotnik, in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Rene Russo also joined the MCU as Frigga in the Thor franchise. Unfortunately, Kilmer's life took quite the turn as he developed throat cancer and lost the use of his voice. His story was brilliantly told in the Amazon documentary Val, so if you're interested in finding out more about his life, I can't recommend it enough. Nicole Kidman recently returned to the DC Cinematic Universe in Aquaman as Atlanta, which makes her the most significant return to DC film. With Batman Forever being the #1 movie of 1995, the producers seemed to have a working formula in place, and it wasn't like they were going to have to cast a new Batman anytime soon, right? Right? I guess that's a story for next time. Join us, same movie time, same movie channel.